There's this really cool new app that came out on the App Store this week, Mike.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
It's Obsidian for mobile. I need to get my bell out now so we can start hitting the bell for Obsidian every single time it comes out.
Blake's got the emoji in the chat for you.
There you go. Nailed it, Blake. So you've been on the Insider build for quite a while, right? So you've been using Obsidian on mobile for a while, right? Is that true?
I have, yep.
Okay. What are your thoughts on it?
It's pretty solid. It's kind of amazing that they took essentially all of Obsidian and smashed it into an iOS app.
Sure.
It's not exactly the same, obviously, but one of the genius things I thought they did was on an iPhone, you can swipe down from anywhere but the top of the screen, which triggers either Control Center or your notifications. And that triggers the command palette, which is the exact same gesture that opens up Spotlight inside of, or in iOS on your home screen, which in a video for the upcoming course that I'm working on at the Suite Setup, I actually described the command palette as sort of Spotlight for Obsidian. So that just instantly fit. It's got this cool little mobile toolbar above the keyboard for like quick actions and things. It really does a pretty good job of taking advantage of some of the interface differences and using them in a positive way, but it still gives you access to the core and community plugins, all the sync, all the stuff that's there on the desktop, is there on mobile. It's a pretty impressive launch. I know like Federico Viticci is using Obsidian primarily on an iOS device, and I think at this point I would recommend even mere mortals like you and me, that is totally doable with this application.
Okay. Fun. So let me just say that the sync on my side was painful to get set up.
So the way to set up sync with the iOS version is to open up the iOS app, create an Obsidian vault, store it in iCloud, which will then create an Obsidian folder in your iCloud drive. Okay. And then a separate subfolder for the vault that you just set up. So if you name your vault notes, it's going to be iCloud Drive /Obsidian/notes. Then what you do is you take all of your stuff. If you're going to migrate it from the Mac, you dump it all in that iCloud Drive folder, and then you let iCloud Drive be the sync. You don't actually use the Obsidian sync service. I agree. I got some wonkiness when I was beaming stuff up and beaming stuff down. There are advantages to doing it that way. You get a year of revision history, and it's all end-to-end encrypted. So there's people who that's the right solution for, but everybody else, save yourself the $4/8 a month and just put it in an iCloud Drive folder.
And if you put it in a Git repository, this is going to be completely painful for you. Just going to say that because it forces you into that. So you end up with a scenario where, like, for example, I had my notes in an iCloud folder, but that doesn't work. Like, I couldn't just reuse that and open it in Obsidian because it has to be in its little sandboxed
Correct. It's got to be in the Obsidian folder, yep.
Correct. So you have to move it there if you want to use that. You can create a local. Not sure why you would do that when everybody wants sync and such. So like I had to do like moving my Git repo on my Mac and then basically reconfigure almost all of it to get it to continue working, which I wasn't expecting. In my head, I was like, oh, well, let me just open a vault. I've already got the notes in working copy. Let's see if it will actually let me use the file system on the phone. And the answer was no. You couldn't do that. So you got to start all over. So just be aware of that. If you're going to use it, that's a thing. Outside of that, I haven't used it a ton, but I have used it a little bit. And I can't really say what I would use it for outside of a potential inbox inside, like on my phone, but Drafts serves that purpose. So I haven't really figured out why I'm using it on my phone yet. So I'm glad I didn't pay the extra just to be on the Insider to get it ahead of time, because I'm not sure I'm going to use it.
Sure.
But it's there. It's kind of cool. I'm glad that they were able to get it out, because I know that it has, because of it being an Electron app, there's a ton that it is able to do from day one, and they don't really have to rewrite much at all to make it work. So there's that.
Yeah, and also if you use the iCloud Drive Sync over the Obsidian Sync service and you keep it in that iCloud Drive folder, it opens itself up to a lot of shortcut automation through the Files app. I actually use Drafts to capture things. And so if you're just going to use Obsidian to capture stuff, there are better options. But if you want a note-taking app, kind of with the intended purpose of using it for creation, I think it's the best option out there at the moment.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, I'm doing a lot of my stuff through Drafts and such into working copy, which then syncs via Git, and then it shows up that way with the automatic stuff. So I do a lot of that, which is fine, but it's just an edge case and an edge scenario that's not typical for people. So
sure,
just be aware of that. If you're one of these weird nut jobs like me, that's a thing you got to be aware of. Fun times. All right, so should we do some follow-up?
Let's do it. You want me to go first?
Sure, why not?
All right. I didn't do these. I kind of did them. The pop tag and OmniFocus I did not do, but I don't think I looked at OmniFocus this week, so fail. Identify tasks to delegate. I don't have a big list of these, but I have delegated tasks, so this is kind of win.
Good work.
I have an assistant now, which is great. And the one of the things that I am terrible at doing is remembering to go post on my own personal site about the podcast that I publish. I have no problem publishing Bookworm on time. I have no problem publishing Intentional Family on time. I have no problem publishing Focus, but all of those live on different servers. There's different processes associated with all of those. And then I never go back to my own site and write a summary post and be like, hey, in this episode, Joe and I covered this book. And so I now have delegated the process for all three of those podcasts to an assistant who is doing a great job preparing the posts. And then I just go in and publish them within 24 hours after she creates them. And I've been doing that just so I can make sure that she doesn't have any questions and she understands the process, but she's doing an awesome job. So I'm ready now to just let her hit publish on her own, which sounds like a stupid little thing. But what I've realized with this, because these posts literally take like 5, maybe 10 minutes at tops to create on my site. But it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, I know I should do that at some point, and then I don't do it because I'm doing something else, but it's in the back of my mind and it causes me to always go back and think about that. And so the thing that I'm doing takes longer. So the actual cost for me not doing these is probably many, many hours if you add it all up. And I've delegated now, I don't have to think about it. So that's pretty cool. I've also delegated some podcast editing. Intentional Family is now being edited by my son, who did a phenomenal job. I showed him kind of my approach to editing. He's using Ferrite on the iPad. And then I'm like, okay, now you try this one, and he's editing it on a Saturday and I'm there with him so I can answer any questions that he has. And how'd you handle this one? I showed him like the first 5 minutes. He did the rest of the episode and then he gave it to me to spot check. I made 3 additional edits. He got on so quick. He's probably better at it than I am. So yeah, I don't have to edit Intentional Family anymore, which is pretty cool. And then the last one, identifying tasks to batch. This I did not do. I probably should still do this. Just figure out like what are all my admin tasks, kind of like a shutdown routine sort of a thing. Which I think that's what this is going to morph into for me. I've been thinking about that, is redefining my morning and evening routines. And I think a shutdown routine would be a logical addition to that. But just identifying a bunch of things that I can batch do whenever I have time doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Good work. I have to admit that the pop tag and OmniFocus sounded like a hokey thing to me from the beginning. I've seen folks that do like the procrastinate tag in OmniFocus. I don't think I've ever done that, but I don't know. I've never seen anybody pull it off successfully. It's a fun concept, but I don't know that I've ever seen it effective.
So here's what I'm really after, and the pop tag really isn't probably the way to do this, but like I want something to show up in a certain perspective. It's like, hey, you chose not to do this before, and that's tally number 1. And now you're choosing not to do it again. That's tally number 2. And by the time you choose not to do it a third time, it should just automatically be deleted. Like if I was creating my own application, that's what would happen here.
Sure.
Is like stuff keeps popping up, not even in a review context, because I know review is like a really killer feature for OmniFocus, and that's not really what I'm talking about, because you could review a project every week and you're going to review it a bunch of different times. But I want this like exploding thing, which is going to keep track of, you keep putting this off, now you have to stop doing it because you're never going to do it. Let's be real here.
Sounds like you need a set of scripts for it.
Potentially. I'm a little bit nervous automating that, but that's kind of the thought process. And so with the original pop tag, it was going to be, okay, you're looking at this once, pop, subtag 1, and then next time you just change the subtag, pop 2. By the time you get to pop 3, now you have everything. Pop 3, you can go look at those and be like, okay, these are the ones that you need to just batch delete because you're never going to do them.
Or it auto deletes.
It could, but that's the part that's scary to me. Until I do it manually first, I don't want to automate it.
Well, if you automated it, puts a little fire under it.
That is also true.
Anyway, that said, I had one task from last episode, which was to create some templates for video projects, which I did do, and that has proved extremely helpful and have used those a few times already. So kudos to templates. I feel one of the interesting things with that is that it seems like that makes it easier to start a video, if that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like because the template is there, it feels like there's less time involved to do that, thus it's easier to do. So that would be an encouragement to anybody who has projects like that. Build a template. It helps.
Yeah, templates are the unsung hero of automation, in my opinion.
Yes.
Because they're the kind of thing that anybody can use, even if you don't think you are an automation person. When most people think of automation, they think of writing those custom scripts that you were just talking about for OmniFocus.
Yes.
And I don't even know how to do that stuff. So that can be intimidating when you think about automation. Like, oh, I guess automation is just not for me. But then you get into stuff like basic shortcuts, and that still feels like, well, there's really some advanced stuff you can do with this. Maybe this isn't for me. And then you get even lower level like templates, and it's like, yes, these I totally can wrap my brain around, and I can leverage these right now.
Yes. All right, let's step into today's book, because I feel like there's a lot of things we could talk about. This is probably going to go long. My apologies. We'll get there. But this is one that I have had recommended at least by 2 different people in multiple cases. And I'm kind of glad it's been recommended, because this is going to be a fun conversation here. But this is Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray. And I think every person that has seen this sitting on my desk or seen me carrying it somewhere, which that generally happens in some form, like, wait, what? What is liminal thinking? It's like, okay, that's one response. The other response is, oh, you have to let me know what you think of it. Like, that's the other response. Like, it just is kind of one of those two is where people tend to land. But this is, so the subtitle on this is Create the Change You Want by Changing the Way You Think. And I think that's an apt subtitle for this. And I'm kind of excited about this one. I think this is along the lines of the Shane Parrish book that we read.
Yes.
I'm drawing a blank on the title. What? I usually
Great
don't
Mental
remember.
Models.
There you go.
I had the same thought.
Yep. I don't normally remember the author's name and not the title. I usually remember it the other way around. But yeah, Great Mental Models. It kind of hits that same nerve with me, and I don't know that it has the same. It doesn't have the same layout,
no,
per se, but it does have that feel at least. What were your gut reactions on it, Mike?
Yeah, so the Great Mental Models talks about this is a lattice work of frameworks that you can use. And this has a lot of the same sort of ideas, except it's packaged more so in a system. And I have thoughts on that, but maybe let's get into the content first.
Sure.
I'm still undecided if this way is better or worse. I think I know which one I prefer, but I also want to talk through this because more than once you've been able to change my mind about things.
So is that a belief you're holding on to at the moment?
Yes. So the ideas in here I really like. The system I'm a little bit skeptical about. I will tell you that. So there's two parts here. Part one, how beliefs shape everything, where there's principles, and then part two, what do you do about it, where there are practices. I'm not quite sure how to implement those practices consistently. I know he's got like a whole big process, and there's action items at the end of every single one of these chapters. And I did not go through and finish every one of those action items. There's a couple that I jotted down as like, these are cool, I'm going to do these, but I don't really want to just follow the system that he kind of is outlining here. And to be fair, he's not saying this is a system, you got to do it this way, but he is trying to lead you down a path, and it feels very linear, whereas the Great Mental Models does not. It's here's all of these ideas and you can combine them any way you want.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's start with, so in the introduction, he starts with what is liminal thinking, which is the question I got a lot, because if you were to just sit and have someone define the term liminal thinking, most people aren't going to have an answer. I don't think, at least the folks that I ran into didn't have any clue. So liminal thinking, the word liminal comes from the Latin root, I think it's limen? Lemon? I assume it's lemon. Liman? Anyway, means threshold. So it's the point where you're crossing over from one thing into the other. It's like that boundary between things. So if you start to combine that, it's the boundary between thinking of one thing into thinking another thing. So it's the boundary between those two thoughts. And on the surface, that seems like a very minor thing. Okay, cool. Fun thought. You can have a thought that's between two thoughts, and it's called a liminal thought or liminal thinking in that time or in that space. But he takes it one step further in that, to use his argument here, change happens at the boundaries of things, which makes sense when you start processing that. So if liminal thinking is the boundary between two thoughts and change happens within boundaries, change is able to happen with liminal thinking. You with me?
Yep.
And that is the area that we're going to process and that he discusses in this book. And it's really an interesting way to term it, I think. I can't say that I have any argument against this concept of change happening within the boundaries, because whenever I think about all of the change that's happened in society over the years, almost every time, well, actually, I've never been able to find a thing where change happened without a boundary of some kind, whether it's intellectual or physical. I haven't been able to nail down what that would be, but I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that particular thought. Anyway, change happens in the boundaries.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about this introductory part. I remember the threshold definition and then basically forgot about it until the end of the book when he brought it back.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how it fits to the visual that he's building throughout the first section here necessarily. He basically is talking about how we define reality and what are you going to do with that threshold definition when you look at that pyramid type diagram, for example. Like it's cool, you can jot it down, but so what?
It is a cool diagram. I think we'll get to that. Does he start that in the first part? I don't remember.
Might be part principle number 2. So
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
we got 15 different chapters to get through.
Yeah. So let's start with part 1, how beliefs shape everything. And he's going to, within the very beginning of this part, he kind of lays out that beliefs are the foundation that things stand on. And that is the foundation that so many things that we think are founded on. And he has this diagram that we'll try to explain here in a little bit, but that he's trying to dismantle that, if you will, and just show us that our beliefs are a very small construct within the broader scheme of reality, if you will. Now, that might sound kind of philosophical, but I think it makes sense as we go through this. In principle 1, where he's starting to lay this foundation, is that beliefs are models. And I'll just say this. At the beginning of each chapter, he has like this little sentence that kind of summarizes the whole chapter, which is helpful because you can kind of get an idea of what you're about to go through. Is it the beginning or is it the end? I just realized it's at the end. Never mind. He summarizes it at the end. Never mind. I was reading it backwards. But on principle 1, he has this statement at the end. Beliefs seem like perfect representations of the world, but in fact, they are imperfect models for navigating a complex, multidimensional, unknowable reality. Which,
Yep.
unknowable reality is like, wait, what? So, anyway, beliefs are models.
He starts with the story of the blind men trying to describe an elephant, and they've all got an individual part, and that's the reality that they know. So when they describe an elephant, one of them's describing an ear, one of them's describing the tail, one of them's describing the trunk, and that is their reality. And he says we can grasp individual fragments, but we'll never be able to grasp the entire thing. He also says on page 6 that a belief is something you hold in your mind, a kind of map or model of that external reality. Sounds a whole lot like the map is not the territory. Exactly, Blake. The difference here is that he adds one additional detail that you mentioned, Joe, that you're never going to be able to fully understand the territory. So, yes, the map is the territory, but even the map maker making their opinionated interpretation of what is important is not able to know the entirety of the territory that they are trying to summarize, which is a minor detail, but I think it's important.
The map is not the territory is a quote by Alfred Korzybski, because that's on the page right at the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
So that is right in the midst of all this, because that is the transition from principle 1 to 2, because principle 2 is beliefs are created. This is where we get the pyramid that he uses. It's not through the rest of the book, but he uses it sporadically through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And beliefs are created. And here's essentially what he's getting to. I'm going to do my best to explain this pyramid through explaining this principle. I think that's how it's going to work. Basically, your foundation that everything is built on is reality, quote unquote, which he has in parentheses the unknowable. And on top of that is your experience, which is a big, long block that things are built on. But the problem is that you have your attention focused on some small subset of your life experience, which means you can imagine that as kind of a pole that sticks up, one really small stick that sticks up from that experience.
It's like a needle on a record player.
Exactly. Super tiny. On top of that needle, somehow balanced up there, are your theories. And on top of that are your judgments. And then on top of that are your beliefs. So if you start to process all of this, you have the reality, which is the unknowable, your experience, which you have your attention focused on one small piece of that to create the stick on which your theories, your judgments, and thus your beliefs are all teeter-tottering up there. And then above that, the beliefs on which you stand is what you think of as the obvious.
You and the other people in your bubble of belief.
Correct. Yes. And when you start to just think through all of these little tiny details with this, I really, really like this diagram.
Yep.
Because it just clicks, at least for me, because there's so much that we have considered our foundation, our core. How could anyone not believe this? And yet, if you follow this model, all of that is founded on judgments, which are founded on theories, which are focused on this stick of attention, which could easily be tipped over if you don't try to prop it up with all of your ignoring of other facts and such. So there's a lot, I think, in this particular diagram. I'm a fan.
On the topic of that record needle attention, by the way, he shares some stats that our capacity for perceiving information is about 11 million bits per second, but your conscious attention, your focus, is limited to 40 bits per second. So already you're limited in your capacity for receiving the information, but the stuff that you are really understanding is severely limited.
Yes.
So that's a very effective model for the point that he's making, that you can't know everything because you are limited by the amount of information that you can take in. I want to point out here, Josh mentions that this book was published before the Great Mental Models, and I think it's interesting. This chapter really spoke to me because I understood the map is not the territory from the Great Mental Models. And I was thinking about this. The way he describes the map is not the territory is not very good, in my opinion. If I would have just read that first chapter before getting to this chapter 2 without the context of reading the Great Mental Models, I feel like this would have been received very differently by me. So I don't really know what to do with that other than to call it out. Like, the Great Mental Models does a really great job of explaining the role of the cartographer in selecting the things that are important. But he's got a different kind of spin on it, and I think it's less effective, which is just that, yeah, you're never going to know everything. Which I don't really understand given the definition of liminal, because that threshold definition, really, what's the point of that except to understand where your limits are and then choose to step beyond those? I think that's what he's trying to teach us to do through all of the action items that are associated with this particular book. But I feel like had I not read the Great Mental Models before this one, I would be much less motivated to do so. It would be very much more like pie in the sky. Let's just think about this instead of let's actually do this.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, because the fact that both of us had independent connections to the Great Mental Models coming into this one, it's an indicator, I think, that it's one of those, as Mortimer Adler would say, is interconnected, or there's a term, I'm drawing a blank on it. There's a term he used for it, where you're starting to put the book in perspective amongst all the other books.
I think it's syntopical reading, but I don't know the exact term for the connectedness that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So because they're within the same topic, you can't help but put one within the view with the lens of the other as a result. So in this case, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a thing to be aware of. We have that bias because we have read the Great Mental Models coming into this one. But in this particular principle, I think the point that he's trying to make here is that the beliefs that we hold, that we stand on, are created based on where we focus our attention.
Yep.
Which is kind of alarming when you stop and wonder about it for more than 10 seconds. If that's all it takes to completely change somebody's beliefs, it's at least something that you should keep in mind, I would say. Which I think would bring us to principle 3. And I know I'm kind of moving quickly through this, and we're probably going to continue doing that just because there's a lot to cover.
There's a lot here, yeah.
There is a lot. I thought about trying to figure out how to cut some of this out, but I just don't think it makes sense unless you touch on each one at least briefly. So anyway, principle 3, beliefs create a shared world. And this particular one is I mean, think about like, okay, you have this belief that you have created because of where you've chosen to focus your attention. But whenever you create those beliefs, you're going to have the tendency to want to find other people who have that same belief. And you're creating a world based on those underlying beliefs that you can share with other people who also have that belief. If that makes sense. That was maybe kind of a roundabout way to say that. But basically, you're finding people who are like you. And you're building kind of your personal world based on those belief systems.
Yes, although he really gets into that, in my opinion, in Principle 5 with the bubble of belief. There is an aspect of this, though, too, because it's in the title. Beliefs create a shared world.
Yeah.
He talks about the learning loop here, and that is that your needs influence your beliefs, influence your actions, influence your results, and then that provides feedback, and then that can either be positive or negative. He defines them as a doom loop or a delight loop, and he tells the story about the rescue dog that they had who bit one of their kids, and then they had an option to respond and trigger a doom loop, or they brought in the dog whisperer and changed it into a delight loop. I think that story is cool. When I read that, I was like, if my dog bit somebody, I'm not hiring the dog whisperer to try to rehab the dog.
Rehab the dog. I love
that. Although my emotional response is maybe a little bit raw. I actually got bit by a dog a couple of weeks ago. I was biking on a trail, and someone had their dogs off of the leash on the right side of the trail. I saw the one dog, and I have a bell on my bike, so I ding the bell, let them know, coming through on the left, go way over to the left side, so there's plenty of space between me and the owner. And I see the one dog off of the leash, hears me ding the bell and kind of cowers over by the owner. And then so I'm going around him. And then on the right side of this trail, there's a bunch of brush. And all of a sudden, like a bat out of hell, comes this other dog just booking it right towards me. I go down into this like little culvert ravine sort of a thing. And I'm just thinking like, there's no way this dog is gonna get me. It's got to like move to intercept like a free safety in football, and it's got to be perfect because I am booking it on my bike. But he totally nailed me. He bit me in the ankle. So I'm bleeding. I stop. I look at it, and the guy's like, "Sorry about that," and he takes off.
Good job. Way to be a responsible dog owner.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that is influencing my perspective when I read this. Is like, okay, good job for you. That's not how I would have reacted at all.
Yep.
That dog is out of here.
Yeah, I've been around a lot of. My wife and I used to volunteer at a dog shelter where the dogs that people didn't want or who had bitten someone, that's where they went, and we got to be the ones who fed them and took them out for walks and all the things and all sorts of rough animals who have been through a lot. And it's amazing how, like, if you have the right demeanor, you can work with these dogs and do a good job. But some of them take a lot of very detailed care to be able to work with. So dogs that just randomly run up and bite people and then run off just seems strange to me.
It wasn't a very deep bite. I still do have a little bit of a scar on my ankle. It happened 2 weeks ago, but it wasn't deep enough where like I felt like I needed to go in. The guy took off, so I couldn't, make sure that it was registered, had its shots, whatever. I mean, it looked like it had one of those harnesses on. The guy just had unhooked it, so I don't know.
Okay.
Whatever. But the big thing is like, for me, it's a dog, right?
Yes.
And I'm not going, if my kids are doing something, which is triggering something in the dog and causing the dog to react, like I'm going to tell my kids not to do that, but also I'm going to get the dog out of that situation because I cannot control my kids 100%. They're not going to be perfect little angels all the time. And my kids are not going to get bit by a dog. Like I'm not going to allow that in my house. So he's talking like his kid got bit by a dog. And I'm just like, what is wrong with you? Get rid of that dog. Your kid is more important. But that's just my perspective. I understand
Sure.
different people, but I had trouble relating to him at that point. At this point in the book, he could not have chosen a worse example to keep me engaged.
Well, this will be a good example because this is what he's talking about, how your beliefs inform how you perceive something.
I know, but he's also trying to inspire me to change, right? And at that point, I'm like, nah,
I know, but let me tell you how it came across to me, because mine is very different than what you took it as. Because whenever he says that he had the dog whisperer come in, you took it as he's immediately trying to figure out how to train the dog not to do that again, right? Is that fair to say? Like, you're thinking he's assuming he's going to keep the dog and try to rehab the dog. And I took it as he brought this guy in to find out if it's something he should have, like, should the dog be put down. Like, I took it as he wasn't sure he was able to make the right call on that. So he brought in somebody who could, and they're telling him, no, actually, you can work with this dog very easily to help him. And that's how I took it. It's like he was just seeking a second opinion there. But I don't think he actually calls out which way he was intending it, because he doesn't say that part.
Yeah, he does say that he had that thought, like, oh, we got to put the dog down. And I'm not saying you have to put the dog down, but the dog at least cannot live in my house anymore. And Josh brings up, depends if the kid instigated it. I disagree with that. I mean, I have a 3-year-old. She's going to instigate a lot of stuff with our golden doodle. But the very first thing that we did when we got it is I started messing with this thing. Whenever it eats, I'm poking it in the mouth. I'm pulling on its tail. I'm going in between its paws. I'm doing everything I can to annoy this dog. And then when it responds even a little bit aggressively, I'm like, no, you don't let it do that. And it's learned over a couple of months, it wasn't even that long. And now my kids are so rough with this dog, and it does not even care. Like, you can totally train this into a dog. And if you are going to bring a dog into your home and you have a family, I feel like this is your responsibility. Like, yes, you do have to make sure the dog is not going to react and bite a kid. But like, at the same time, you don't know where the dog is coming from when you get a rescue dog. So these two things, my personal opinion, don't mesh very well. It's not something I would be willing to do. But different strokes, different folks.
Dogs, kids, shared worlds. Great fun, right? So, All right, let's keep going, because the next one's kind of fun too. Principle 4, beliefs create blind spots.
I like this one.
This one's very interesting, because what generally happens is if you hold a belief, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to see outside of it. And there are a few, I have all sorts of things where this comes up, but one of the stories he tells is that he had a friend tell him that he was unable to get a job as was it an associate professor at a college because he didn't have a master's degree, a teacher of some sort because he didn't have a master's degree. And he figured he could either go through the work to get a master's degree so that he could apply to the job, or he could just apply to the job and find out if he actually needed a master's degree. So he opted to apply for the job without the master's degree and got the job without the master's degree. Like, because this other person, and I've heard this many times, like, you can't get certain jobs because you don't have X, Y, and Z credentials. And people say that fairly regularly, but it's odd the number of times those exceptions are made. One that I know that I had to work through just here recently was whenever I was in the process of trying to buy our now new old house, definitely not new.
New to whenever you house.
It's over 100 years old, so it's definitely not new. The thing is that they were telling us, at least the mortgage company was telling us, we couldn't close on the house within a certain amount of time because it needed a new septic, and they weren't going to allow us to close on it until the septic was put in. Okay, so I don't know any different, so I just kind of follow that. I relay that to my agent, who immediately says, oh no, they can close without the septic being done. We'll just do X, Y, and Z, and then it'll be fine. And I'm sitting here like, wait, what? But the guys who give us the money to be able to write the check to be able to close on the house said no, and you're telling me yes. Okay, now what? So what do we do? Long story short, we closed in 28 days. The septic still isn't installed, but it's being installed very shortly because they allowed us to close without the septic being installed because of some quirks in how all the rules work. And it worked out better for everybody involved, and it made it a better deal for everybody involved. But that was a blind spot, at least to me.
Yep.
Like, I had no idea that was even an option, but in front of the right person, it's like, oh no, you can get an exception on that. That's fine. Like, what?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's an example of a blind spot. That's what he's talking about here.
Yeah, and the name that of the term that he uses for this is limiting belief, a belief that narrows the range of possibilities. And he mentions that even your closest friends may share limiting beliefs that close off opportunities for you, even though they have the best of intentions. So your mortgage company is just trying to make it simple for you to understand what the steps are and outline everything so you can move forward as quickly as possible. And then your agent is like, actually, you can do these other things, and showed you some different opportunities, a different path, a different way of doing things. And that's cool that you had somebody who was thinking that way, who was able to do that for you. I think it's a little bit more difficult when you don't have someone who's telling you, hey, try these other things.
Right.
Like the situation of the person who has just gotten the advice that, yeah, you need a master's degree before you can apply for this position. If there's no one else telling you otherwise, it's hard to put yourself in the position where, well, I'm just going to see what happens. But I love that idea of like everything that people tell you, questioning whether that is actually true and seeing what you can get away with, basically.
Yes. Yeah. I have to say, like, that whole concept of like what we went through with getting the house closed in the time frame that we did, there were at least 5 different entities involved that all had to align with exceptions in order to make that happen. And every single one of them, I was the one that had to make those calls and get those exceptions, which is strange that I even was able to do that, because that is not me at all. And going through that process, just in talking to these folks, almost everybody was in the mindset that, oh, you need that. Oh, okay. I mean, we don't normally do that, but I suppose that's okay. Yeah, okay. I'll send that letter over. Like, almost all of them were that way. And it made me like,
yeah,
maybe I should just ask for random things and just see what people give. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's taking advantage. I don't know. But like, okay, sure. Why not?
So the one thing I hear from people all the time whenever I talk about email and like disconnecting from your email, like, oh, that's great for you. I could never do that. How do you know? Have you ever tried to apply this principle to breaking free from your email? I bet it would work.
Yep, I hear you. Anyway, it's
not as cool as getting a job that requires a master's without the master's. Correct. But I mean, yes, that's the place to start for this kind of stuff, I think, is like question all of the guiding principles that govern the way that you operate, and try to move the needle in the direction that you want it to go.
Yes. Yep. And there's all sorts of things too. Like, since going through that process, we're doing a massive remodel on the house right now. So I've got a lot of stuff torn apart, but when I've had inspectors or engineers in and out, like, generally a lot of people are like, oh, no, you can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. I've learned at this point to just ask, like, well, what would make it possible?
Sure.
Like, I'm not asking for an exception. I'm not asking you to do anything. I just want to know, what would it take to make it possible? Yes, I cannot take X, Y, and Z. I can't take that wall out of the house. Sure. What would make it possible for me to take that wall out of the house?
Sure.
Like, what has to happen for that to be able to be done? And in every case so far, they're like, oh, well, you have to put this concrete thing in the basement, and then you could put that beam in. It's like, oh, so whenever I do this, I can take that wall out if I add a pad in the basement. Yeah. So it's not impossible. So, like, you get what I'm saying? Like, just
Yep.
asking those questions it's strangely satisfying, honestly.
But even if they believe it's impossible, there are places where you can push and bend the rules. He tells a story later on about the guy who works at the place where you have to wear a certain uniform. I think it was a white shirt and blue slacks. And he just wore whatever he wanted. And he just kept doing it. And everybody saw it. And they're like, this guy keeps breaking the rules. But no one did anything about it. And over time, he kept doing this. And then he also brought in a whiteboard and wrote something different on it, or drew something different on it every day. And the fact that he was breaking the rule branded him as the creative guy.
Yep.
It actually created more value in the eyes of everybody else in the company who was just abiding by the rule. So if they would have went and asked somebody, is this possible? They would have said, no, it's impossible. But he just did it anyways and not only got away with it, but essentially like got promoted in everybody's eyes because of it.
This is where it's just fascinating to me. Like, okay, well, people have these limiting beliefs. They may not even realize they have them. But if you even hint at a question towards them, they can sometimes crumble very quickly.
Yep.
Which leads us into the next one, Principle 5, beliefs defend themselves. Basically, there's this concept of self-sealing logic, where this is exactly what you would think it is. We have our beliefs, and we will try to find information that confirms those beliefs because it's comfortable. And if something challenges those beliefs, it's uncomfortable, and we'll tend to avoid it. And if we're presented with something that is, in fact, very contradictory to what we already believe, we'll somehow spin it with some crazy, ridiculous logic, even if it contradicts some other part of our beliefs, so that our entire structure doesn't have to fall down. So don't do that. Challenge your beliefs.
Yeah, a bubble of belief reinforces and protects existing beliefs by denying the possibility of other beliefs. And he gave a couple of examples of this, which again, said topical reading for the win, talked about Nokia and Apple's iPhone, BlackBerry also, I think, fits this description. That's what I thought of. I thought of the Innovator's Dilemma by Morton Christensen, and then the Detroit automakers versus Toyota. And without that context, his brief description of these two things, I don't think hits home. But because we had gone through the Innovator's Dilemma, it's like, oh, I totally get this.
Yes.
And that's the thing. I don't know how to disconnect from where I am right now as I read this book. But I do kind of question if this is like one of the first books that you pick up, is it as effective as it was when you and I read it? Because it's not a very long book, and there are a lot of visuals here, and there's a lot of blanks that we have already filled in because we have read some other books prior to this. I think it is very possible that you go through this and you have very surface level understanding of some of these things, if you understand them at all, and you walk out of this book maybe with more questions than when you went into it.
Yeah, that was something I was trying to pay attention to this time, because we've mentioned that. It occurred to me that we have mentioned that on the last few books, where we don't know if a certain part is actually that great because we have enough of this syntopical background that informs us whenever we get to that. So I was trying my best to pay attention to this as I went through this one, and I have to say that whenever I was on a walk through the woods and stuff last night just to try to process some of this, and one of the things I came to is like, I think this is actually a very good foundational piece to start with. I don't think there is the need for some other book, even the books that we didn't care for. Like, how many times have we now mentioned How to Read a Book, which we didn't rate well, and Innovator's Dilemma, which we did not like, and yet they continue to inform the books that we read after them. So I think that this is one that likely fits that bill of could be a good starter book with this type of thing, and you can pick the parts that are of interest to you or that are pain points for you, and then find the outcropping from that.
Sure.
The easy way to do that is to easily just go back through the bookworm log and listen to all of them, And then you'll be able to pick out which books you should read to fill in those gaps. That's the best way that you could possibly do this. I'm just going to say that. All right. So principle 5, beliefs defend themselves.
One other thing on this, he mentions that there's 2 ways that people make sense of new ideas. They ask, is it internally coherent? So basically, does it line up with the other things that you think you know? And then is it externally valid? And I thought it was interesting that he said people rarely test ideas for external validity when they don't have internal coherence. So that means that there is a very strong possibility that something is externally valid, but you never even test it because it is not internally coherent.
Yes.
So that point, I think, is kind of getting back to some of the stuff he was talking about at the very beginning about you don't know what you think you know. But this is the point where that really clicked for me.
Solid. Principle 6, beliefs are tied to identity. I would say that's exactly what it sounds like. You know, if you want to, what's the quote they have here at the beginning? It's from Tom Robbins. If you want to change the world, change yourself. So whenever you have beliefs, it's very easy for us to put ourselves in a spot where our entire identity is tied to those. And it's because, like, if you have all of these judgments and theories and your attention is focused on a certain part of your experience using that pyramid once more, right? If you're doing all of that, you tend to put yourself at the top, and what you're standing on is what you see as who you are. Think about that. Whenever you talk to somebody, how many times do they refer to, like if you ask somebody who they are, they always talk about the things that they believe in.
Yeah.
You ever notice that?
It's true.
It's like, that's not actually who you are. Those are the things that you, being who you are, think, but that doesn't necessarily translate completely.
Yeah, those are the governing beliefs, which are tied to your identity and your feelings of self-worth. And he has a visual in this section of like the inverse tree roots, you know, so you have your beliefs up at the top and then they all come back into like the few ideas at the bottom. Those are your governing beliefs, the ones that really define who you are. And when your governing beliefs get attacked, he says that that's like you are being attacked. I also found this part interesting where he talks about the conspiracy theories, because your governing beliefs being tied to your identity, what do you do if you don't have control over your life? If you feel that you are a victim and there are other people who are determining how happy, successful, satisfied you are, then that's kind of the ideal environment for these conspiracy theories to take off. He says that these thrive in groups specifically, so not just individuals, but groups, because that bubble of belief, they reinforce it, right? I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Everybody thinks this way, right? But those conspiracy theories originate and they thrive in these cultures where people don't feel like they have control of their lives. And I use culture there because I was a biology major for a little while in college. And I remember doing like the bacteria on the slides and stuff, and they call that a culture, right? So it's like the environment where the bacteria can grow. That's kind of how I view these conspiracy theories, is like these bacteria, these aren't good things, but they are thriving in these gross environments.
The petri dish is thriving.
Exactly. And the gross environment just happens to be the people that we've surrounded ourselves with, who are just reinforcing these negative, unhealthy beliefs, which cause us to be bitter and resentful and bring our focus solely on ourselves and all of the things that are going wrong in our own life. And why doesn't anybody see this? Doesn't anybody care? Isn't anybody going to fix this? That's a very helpless place to be.
It is. That it is. It's kind of sad. I'm sitting here like processing some of what you're saying. It's like, it's sad to watch whenever people are in that spot. But
yep,
this is where we get to part 2. What do you do about it?
Well, this is going back just real quickly. One of my action items in this section is to make a list of my own governing beliefs, because I think you can just let these things go, and then you can find yourself in that situation where you are identifying with the conspiracy theories. And this is not like left or right. he shares a lot of different examples of how it doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, whatever side of the political spectrum you find yourself on, you're going to find the people on your side who are going to say it's the other side's fault. Again, like leaders eat last and all of that coming into play in this section for me. But it would be better for you just to attack your own governing beliefs than to have them attacked for you by somebody else eventually.
Sad day when other people step in and take that role.
Yep.
So again, part 2, what do you do about it? There's a nine practices that he recommends here. Earlier on, you mentioned this as a system. I didn't interpret this as a system. Maybe that's just my viewpoint on it, but that might be because of the term.
Did you look at the action items at the end of the chapters?
I did. Yep.
Do you think that they were intended to be completed in a specific order?
No.
Okay. That's the only thing I kind of thought they did, and that's why I called it a system. I think they kind of are. I think he tries to make them build on each other, but there's a lot of like very separate concepts here, and I don't think you necessarily need to. Yeah,
I didn't do any of those exercises because they were going to take quite some time to work through, and I just didn't want to commit to that at this point, and which means I'll never do anything with them. But there's a lot that you could do there, but again, because of what he titles these are practices, and generally when I think of a practice, it doesn't necessarily require other practices before it. I mean, sometimes it does. It's not universal, but there's so many of these that I just didn't place it as needing to be done in a certain order. Don't know what that is.
Sure. Maybe I kind of felt as I read through this that he's trying to get these, specifically the principles, to be built one on top of another. Like he's layering these in specific ways. Mm-hmm. So you can't really talk about beliefs creating a shared world until you talk about beliefs being created.
Sure.
You have to understand that pyramid before you can overlay the learning loop on top of it. And the practices are a little bit more disconnected than that. But by the time I'm getting through part 1, I'm feeling like I have to do these things in a specific order. So he doesn't tell me, okay, this part's different. So I just kind of project that on part 2 as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think, at least my take on it, the principles are all standalone. The practices are all standalone. But he was just a good writer and put them in a good order to where it made sense.
Sure.
That's the way
fair.
I took it. But anyway, practice 1, assume you are not objective.
So question for you, how do you pronounce this 2x2 grid that he has in the section?
Pronounce
Do you remember?
I got to get there. There was a
It's
word,
spelled
but I can't.
Johari.
Oh, Johari.
It is actually Johari.
Is it?
Want to know why?
Well, I know why, because the two names that are tied to it, but I pronounced it Johari
because Joe and
in my
Harry
head.
invented it.
Yeah, the guys who invented this matrix, their names were Joe and Harry. Okay, so Joe, J-O-E, Harry, H-A-R-R-Y, as you would expect. But they call it the Johari window, but they spelled it J-O-H-A-R-I in the book. So that's what yes. But I taught, in my head, it was Johari.
Yeah, he explicitly calls that out. And when he did, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
That can't be why they named it that, and I feel like calling it out in this chapter kind of discredits it a little bit.
Kind of
like, hey,
super
let's
cheesy.
make a 2x2 bookworm grid and call it the Jamaica grid.
Yep, totally.
I don't know. This book is really short. There's a lot of things that could be expounded upon. Why did he waste words explaining that, oh, by the way, this is a combination of these two guys' first names? If people want to make that connection, go ahead and let them. But otherwise, just let everybody call it the Johari window, and it sounds way more official.
Yep. I kind of wanted it as a footnote. He has a lot of footnotes, but anyway, side note, I suppose. Anyway, assume you are not objective. He had there's at the very beginning, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's like these summaries of each chapter, and the summarization for this particular one is, if you're part of the system you want to change, you're part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that because a lot of times I work at a church, right? A lot of times people come up to me and say, hey, the drums were too loud. Or a better example is somebody came up to me, this has probably been a month ago, and said a certain singer sounded very tinny. Now, coming from the sound world, I know that if you use the word muddy or tinny or boomy, or like if you use some of those terms, generally it means you have some form of an audio background, because those are specific terms that we use when we're talking about like an EQ on a
They're speaking
system.
your language.
It's like, okay, so I just clicked with you. It's like, okay, I didn't hear that. Here's the system. You're welcome to change it. And I got silence. And it's in a blank look, because that's typically what happens is a lot of people want to complain, and they want to complain about the system or whatever it is that they're seeing going wrong. But the moment you flip it and have them become part of the solution to that problem, they back out and don't want to be involved. So it's like, if you're going to take on solving a problem or pointing out a problem, at least be somewhat open to at least consulting on how to solve it. But anyway, Side note, be objective.
This window that we mentioned at the beginning, it breaks it into 4 different grids. So there's things that are known to others, things that are unknown to others. That's on the y-axis. And on the x-axis, there's things known by you and things that are unknown by you. And the blind spots are the things that are known to others and unknown by you. And basically, that's the place to focus. Your biggest blind spot is yourself, he says. And that gets into what you were saying. If there's a problem, assume that you are the problem.
Yes, especially if you're part of that system. Yeah.
Yep, and try to figure out what you are doing wrong and what you need to fix.
Yep.
Because you're not going to change anybody else anyways.
Yeah. And to do that, and this is where I think we were talking about things sometimes build here, but practice 2 is empty your cup, which he talks about how it's difficult to learn new things or be open to new things until you let go of your old things, or be willing to let go of the old things that you have learned. I see this a lot with folks that I do IT support for. Whenever they come to me and like, okay, I've got this presentation I need to make. I can't get this web link to load inside PowerPoint. And generally whenever I get something like that, it's like my first question is, why are you loading a web page in a PowerPoint? That seems odd to me. But they have this old way that they're used to thinking about things, and I'm pitching something completely different. But in order for them to be receptive to that, they have to let go of that old thinking before they can accept that new. Thus, empty your cup.
Yeah, I like the description here of the beginner's mind. I've heard this phrased differently before. I think it was Sean McCabe who kind of talked about the curse of knowledge. Like, you forget what it was like when you were at the beginning of your journey. You have all this knowledge that you've accumulated over time, and you forget what it was like at the beginning. And in order to learn something new, you have to go back to the beginning. So good leaders, he mentions in here, supplement information with sense making and walking around. They're constantly emptying their cup and assuming that they know nothing about a particular situation. And I think this is a place where he shared the story about the people who turn around the companies. They show up and they start talking to the employees, and the employees share what's going wrong. And when I read that, I was kind of like, well, don't the managers, don't the people who are running the show, like, don't they ever talk to the employees? And they, in some cases they don't, but I think in other cases,
Almost
maybe they
never.
do, but they don't hear it because they have this whole, however many years they've been doing things a certain way. So one person or even a group of people saying, we see this other thing, that doesn't register to them because in their mind, they have built up this picture over all these years of this is the way that things are done. It's a good challenge, to make this a practice. And again, like the way my brain works, assume that you are not objective, assume that your biggest blind spot is yourself. That's a prerequisite to emptying your cup. If you don't assume that you have that your biggest blind spot is yourself, you're going to go in there thinking, well, I have all of this valid information I have already collected. And essentially what he is saying in this is like, no, you got to dump it out and you got to collect new information. And then you can take it back to the lab and you can see how it jives with everything else, but everything's going to be weighted the same. So
Yep.
I don't know, talking through this again, I do feel this is kind of in a specific order, but also practice. Like this is something that you do consistently. I don't know. These exercises, this is not something you're building into like your weekly routine.
No,
right?
no.
Your weekly review is not going through all 9 of these practices. So I also had a little bit of trouble with like the term practice. This feels to me like, okay, do this once and maybe that's the first time you've done it. But ultimately after that, it's these are kind of like my generic action items that maybe I'll do them, maybe I won't. I won't have any way to document them. They just sort of happen in the background, maybe kind of, sort of.
Okay. I want to go into the next one because it ties into this perfectly, I think.
Yeah,
maybe this is why you say it builds. But so empty your cup, let go of the things you've learned before to be open to the new things. However, you cannot do that unless you have practice number 3, which is create a safe space. Because in the case of the company you're referring to, I don't think he gave us the name of the company, but they did one of 2 things. If they were brought in, they either guided your company through bankruptcy, or did they buy it from them? They
turned it around,
debt.
but they owned it. Yep. They came in at the point where it was already too far gone for you to maintain control and to save it.
They would pay off your debt in exchange for the company.
Yep.
And by doing that, they would then kick you out as the management team, and they would start the process of listening to all of the people. But in order to do that, they had to make these safe, they had to make a safe space for people to feel comfortable to share their inner beliefs about how the company could be made better. Thus, practice 3, create a safe space. And this is one that I think is absolutely vital. And it's part of, I think, oddly enough, even though I'm talking about how these are building on each other, this is one that I feel like stands alone, because this is one that I think a lot of the others are dependent on, even the ones before it. So the ones before it are kind of dependent on this, including the ones after that. So this one, although it's still 3 in the list out of 9, I feel like it could have been much up in the top 1 or 2, probably.
Yep.
Just because the other 2 are dependent on that, I would say.
Well, this one's interesting because he mentions the SCARF model for caring for emotional needs. And at this point...
Which, by the way, I love the acronym, SCARF.
Yeah. And at this point, whose emotional needs are you caring for? Not your own. So it stands for status. Does this person feel important, recognized, or needed by others? Certainty. Do they feel confident they know what's ahead? Autonomy. Do they feel like they have control of their life, work, and destiny? Relatedness. Do they feel like they belong? Fairness. Do they feel like they're being treated fairly? So he's making a switch here, which, again, I think is very much in line with a linear progression, because you can't start by looking at other people first. You have to make sure your ducks are in a row. So assume you're not objective, empty your cup. I feel like those are prerequisites before you would try to apply this SCARF model. Now, interestingly, the examples he uses in this chapter are really negative examples of places that have neglected the SCARF model, which have gotten those companies to the point where his friend shows up and takes them over.
Yep.
So it's almost like you're either doing this or you are not surviving as a business. And that I think is true. But the larger point, I think, in this section, the part that stood out to me anyways, is that it is impossible to leave your feelings at the door. So when you empty your cup, you're emptying it of everything except your feelings, because those are going to stay. And on page 77, he says something which I think is pretty profound as it pertains to personal productivity. We achieve results in life not because we're objective, but because we care. So it does not matter what sort of system you apply to your life. The perfect system is going to do nothing for you unless you are emotionally invested in working that particular system. And then he crosses the bridge into like not just you, but other people. He says reasons don't get people to act, emotions do. And when I read this, I am applying it to myself. I'm asking myself, how can I apply emotional motivation, basically, to the things that I want to do. I do see how people could take this approach and try to apply it in an organization, but I think it's summarized as don't be a jerk and build trust over time.
Yep. That'd do it too. Yeah, they tell the story of the guy who had the tea in this section. We got to keep moving, but he had an area in his little office cubicle where he could make tea. And whenever people would come to him who were upset or wanted to file a complaint with him, he's like, well, let's talk about it over tea. Well, think about the tea making process. You have to heat up the water, you have to let it steep, and then you can begin the process of drinking it. And they make the side note that it's rare that people can be upset and angry while they're drinking a cup of tea. So there's that going for tea.
Does that work with coffee too?
No, it doesn't. Guaranteed. I've been in coffee dates where the other person is very angry with me.
Did you make it by hand prior to that though? Like kind of what I was thinking is like, this is a perfect excuse for you to buy that little contraption.
Yeah. You should post a link to this ridiculous coffee maker that I found, and I told Mike he needs to buy it.
It's the Belgium Luxury Royal Family Balance Siphon Coffee Maker in gold. And it's not nearly as expensive as I thought it was when you shared the link to me. This probably doesn't take that long, to be honest. I've seen siphon coffee before. This is probably, if you're making tea from scratch and you had to let it steep, this is probably something similar.
Sure.
Which is what got me thinking, like, maybe this serves the same sort of purpose and you should get this for your office so you can have those tough conversations. I did find this on Amazon, so I will post this in the chat.
Too funny. Anyway, making tea makes a safe space, and then people are able to talk about difficult things, which brings us to practice 4, triangulate and validate. And this is, if I were to summarize this, look at a situation from as many viewpoints as you can and try to validate all of the steps in the process to figure out which of those is most true, I guess would be the way to say that. But if something doesn't make sense in the midst of trying to validate that thing, you're likely missing something. And
sure,
as many examples as I've tried to come up with, the easiest one in my mind right now is COVID and vaccines. And it doesn't matter where you land on this. If you're an anti-vaxxer or you're a hardcore vaxxer, where do you want to land in this? Trying to see that viewpoint from as many different angles as you can and try to figure out the facts around it, no matter which side you're on, is actually quite difficult, I find, to get something very solid, no matter which side you're trying to come at it from. And I think it's because we've got so many of these, what was the term earlier? The self-confirming biases and stuff that we
the bubble
tend
of belief.
to sit on. Bubble of belief, there you go. Like, because of that, it's very hard to get yourself to break outside of that and see things from a different viewpoint. Politics is a prime example of that. People don't want to look beyond their party lines at all to consider something. So anyway, try to see something from a bunch of different angles. If something doesn't make sense in the process of trying to understand that viewpoint, you're probably missing something. That's the point.
The best line in the whole book is in this chapter.
Okay.
He says, the internet is like a grocery store of facts.
I saw this. I loved that. It's a great quote.
Yeah. And the point there is that you're not going to buy everything in the grocery store. You're going to pick and choose a few specific things that you want. And when it comes to facts, you can find a few specific things that support your bubble of belief if you want to do that. Yes. So triangulation is trying to look at things from other perspectives to escape that. And this kind of ties back to the idea of falsifiability, which again is from the great mental models. The test of a good theory is not whether it can be proven that it's true, but whether it can be disproven. That should be our goal when we're trying to examine a theory and asking ourselves, is Is this correct? Just because you can predict someone's behavior, it says, doesn't mean that you validated it. Which that applies it specifically to individuals and the way that they act. And I think that's an interesting application. There's a lot of value just in that. We judge other people by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. Just because you can predict someone's going to respond this way, you don't really know why they're responding that way. So it's a good reminder to try to understand people's core motivations, put yourself in their shoes and try to look at it from their perspective. But it's also a lot broader than that. We should be doing that with every belief that we come in contact with. And the big challenge for me, I think, as I read this is just collect other viewpoints, which I know are contrary to the ones that are convenient and comfortable for me. Go read the news sources from the places that I know are going to disagree with my worldview. Just because my worldview is not going to be complete reality. That's back to part one. I have my one perspective on this, and maybe maybe I know this is kind of best case scenario, right? But let's assume that the way I'm approaching something is correct. It still doesn't mean that there's not other correct interpretations of the same reality. Just because I have one piece of the elephant and someone else has a different piece of the elephant doesn't mean that I can call their definition of the elephant incorrect. That's wrong. I think that's the big takeaway from this is like, give other people a break. Assume that there's some truth in everything and challenge everything that you think you know.
Yeah. Yep. Which, that's a good lead into practice 5, actually. Ask questions, make connections. There's a story here. I don't know the guy's name, but he was a change agent, I guess would be the term for him. And he was tasked with going into an area and trying to help figure out how to fix some societal issues. And what he decided to do, what he normally does, is just start walking the streets and just talking to people, just asking them, how's life? What would make it better? Do you like the government? Do you how do things go for you? And he ran across some fishermen who were telling the story of how, fishing's great. We're always able to catch more than we need. We can easily get them to the market. Problem is, they start to spoil as the day goes on, and we can't sell anything at our higher prices early in the morning because no one comes and buys them until later when we have to drop the prices whenever they've been sitting out in the sun all day long. So we can't get good prices on our fish because they've been sitting out in the sun all day long. It's like, okay, all right, well, I hope you get that figured out. And then he goes on down the road, and I forget what it was he bought, a drink of some sort that was cold.
Yeah.
And it was in the same market area as these guys selling the fish. And it's like, how did you get this cold? Like, oh, with the ice that I have here. How did you get the ice? There's no electricity in this marketplace. Like, how did you get the ice? Oh, well, there's this guy. He makes these massive blocks of ice. So he goes and finds the guy that's making the ice blocks and talks to him, and it turns out he's got like a generator and a whole process that he can go through to make ice, and he sells it to a few of these folks. He's like, well, how would you like to massively increase your business? And what if you could sell a lot more ice? Could you handle that? And he figures it out, and he's like, okay. So then he connects the fisherman to the ice maker, and guess what? They're able to keep their high prices all day long, and it starts to fix some of the poverty issues with the fishermen, thus starting to create the societal change that he was tasked with solving. The point of this is asking questions just to figure out how things work and how people think, what makes them excited, what makes them upset, and then start to connect the dots between what their problems are and what other people could potentially solve for them or yourself. Like, this is just a marketing thing in that sense. But this is a very interesting thing because you can start to connect the dots between your beliefs and somebody else's beliefs, help some folks out in the process.
So I love that story of recognizing that, hey, ice could be used over here too. I want to divert a little bit from the point that he's making here, though, because that story perfectly illustrates the approach that I take with my notes inside of Obsidian. So instead of asking yourself, how do other people think?
How are you making that jump, dude?
No, listen. So you said this just now. You said some form of asking the question, how do other people think? Yep. That's what I do inside of my notes app is, how do I think? I look at these connections and I'm like, where can I use these things in other places, and how do these things connect that I'm not seeing? So that's the personal application of this for me. But I do love the fact that he's calling this out and asking these questions. And I think in this section is the story where I can't remember the exact chapter, but in this section, he talks about the UNICEF and how they were going to give the laptops to people, and they were going to write their stories. And they didn't really understand that no one really wanted to figure out how to use these laptops and tell their stories. So they were asking questions before they delivered all these laptops that were based on their perspective and where they were coming from. So he mentions that when you ask these questions, you have to ask them without any of your bias attached to them. You can't go into it thinking a certain way, because what you'll do is you will ask the questions in a way that will confirm the bias that you have. So go in and ask questions about things that seem obvious to other people. Yeah, dig to the bottom of things and keep asking why, but also just do it in a way where you're going to get a broad range of answers. I think this is one of those aha moments for me where I don't have anything specific with this, but I do want to, whenever I ask a question, ask it in a way where I am getting a true, honest, open answer. And I can totally see, looking back, on how I've been guilty of asking things in a specific way in order to kind of collect the data points that I want. And it's not insidious. It's not something that like you're trying to formulate a specific story. It just kind of happens. As an example, with like the product development process, you send out these surveys, right? You want to identify people's biggest problems with Obsidian or whatever before crafting solutions for them. Like, we've done that with this Suite setup, but I can even see places where we're coming into this with a certain perspective of this is the problem people are having. And maybe it's our fish are rotting too fast and they don't see the fact that, oh yeah, there is ice on the other side of the market. We can totally use it over here. I don't know how to break down those walls other than to just try to make those as many weird connections as you can. And some of them are going to provide those inspirations and stick.
Yes. 100%. Let's go on to practice 6. Disrupt routines. This is another way that you can, start to challenge your own beliefs or challenge how things can be done. But essentially, it's just what it sounds like. Many beliefs are like cemented into our day-to-day routines or even our week-to-week routines, and they just become on autopilot, to use the term that he uses in the summary here. But if a routine is a problem, disrupt the routine to create new possibilities. That's from him. One of the stories in here was that there was I think it was a mom, and she had a teenage son that was playing games too late at night, and she could never get him to put the games away and go to bed. And she would normally go in, get upset, tell him to shut the game off and go to bed. And that was the normal routine, and it sometimes worked, didn't work always, but created this kind of negative culture. Well, one night she decided to, instead of going in and throwing her hissy fit, she went downstairs and turned off the wireless router instead of doing her normal. And he, of course, was like, wait, what's going on? There's no Wi-Fi. What does everybody do when there's no Wi-Fi? You go to the router and you reset it, right? This is what everybody does. Everybody knows you go unplug it, wait 30 seconds, plug it back in, or the impatient ones of us unplug it, count to 3 and plug it back in. And this is what he went down to do, and found his mom standing there with the cord to the router in her hand. It's like, oh, okay, I'll go to bed now. And then he goes to bed. I have no idea how that story turns out long term, but that's the concept, right? Disrupt the routines, change the way you're coming at things, to change up the potential behind how you believe things, or what you believe, I guess.
That was actually the author's wife, by the way.
Oh, it was. I missed that.
Yeah.
Or at least I didn't remember that.
He shared this manuscript before it published, and she started thinking this way, and then that was her solution to that problem.
That's what it was. Yep.
Which got me thinking, there are certain things that are, shall we say, a little bit more difficult than they should be, like getting people to bed on time. So I want to take this approach of figuring out, what are the routines and what are the ways that we can disrupt them. I don't think this is as simple as unplugging a Wi-Fi router.
No, not generally.
That's a pretty genius application of that, by the way, though, because it's kind of happening until they intervene, and then the way they intervene wasn't producing the result that they wanted to. With something like bedtime, I don't think it's as simple because it's not a process that happens without any involvement. So we're an active part of that. So maybe we can change, some of the ways that we do it. But I think the real place to apply this is those kind of automatic cycles that you're not driving anyways, and then figuring out what you can do to step in at a specific point and change the trajectory. I don't have any other specific examples of that, but I loved that story. And I think if I spend some time thinking about it, there's probably a bunch of places that I could apply that in my own life.
So practice 7 is act as if in the here and now. As if in the here and now. This is basically like if you have a belief that you're not 100% sold on, and you don't know if it's one of these governing beliefs for you, you could change it or act as if it's true right now to find out and see how things turn out.
Yep.
An example from college for me is our, what was his name? I can't think of his name. Anyway, his job was to help students pick majors, essentially. That was his consultant type position with students. And anytime he had a student come in and say, I don't know if I want to be an engineer. I've been considering nursing or being a teacher or going into farming, or I was like, I don't know if that's what I want to do. He would have them change their major immediately, like right then. Like, you think you want to do that? Great, let's change your major right now. Like, what? So they would change their major and then go through the process of redetermining all the classes that would be necessary to make that happen. Now, they are, of course, in the middle of classes right then, so they have to finish out that semester, and then they would figure out how to make it work for the remainder, however many semesters they had left. But that's what he did. Every time, if someone was questioning their major, he would have them change it immediately.
Interesting.
And I know a lot of people who were very grateful for that, because what it did was it forced people to then start thinking like they are on a different trajectory overnight. And they have the path to get there already laid out for them. So then they're essentially acting as if they are that major, because they are, technically. And then they can figure out if that's the right path or not. And if they realize, nope, I was on the right path to begin with, well, guess what? You already had that path laid out. Let's just revert back and go back to that one. But it generally only took about a week for the people to figure out if the major actually needed to change or not. So that's all it took. I always thought that was genius.
That's an interesting example of this principle. He goes back to the learning loop here. He's got a double loop learning, which I'll just quickly go through the steps here, but I think this totally applies to what you just shared, where number 1, you recognize you're operating from a bubble of belief, which is a reality distortion field. Number 2, you don't just observe behavior, you try to figure out the underlying needs and beliefs that are operating. Number 3, if you're seeing the results that you want, great. But number 4, if not, explore and examine as many alternate beliefs as you can. What that guidance counselor type person was doing was forcing people to actually think through the rest of the process and explore those alternate beliefs, and then go ahead and try it. See what happens. Did it improve the situation? If so, great. If not, you can always go back to the old way. Or Dave Gray would say, repeat as necessary. Try something else. That's where, I think there's a limit maybe on the number of majors you want to try. So the analogy falls down.
Right.
But there are these worlds of possibility that are around us. And we do have to kind of engage with some of the things that we didn't really think were possible, which is interesting because he also says in this chapter that you don't have to believe a hypothesis in order to test it. So you don't have to assume that this is true or even feasible. You could just see, let's just see if this works. And maybe it does.
Yep.
Maybe you end up becoming a productivity writer, podcaster, whatever, when you spent your entire life working for the family business. I'll just see what happens.
Let's give it a shot. Who knows? All right, that brings us to practice 8, which is make sense with stories. This one I feel like is super simple. Like if you're trying to relay a belief to someone else, guess what? The best way to do that is to tell a story. This is why, and he even calls this out, every single principle, every single practice that he brings up, every chapter begins with a story. This is also why Mike and I do this a lot, where when these chapters come up, there's a point that comes up, what happens? We tell a story about it, because then it allows me to relay that concept, that belief, to use this terminology, within the existing beliefs that I have, so that the point gets across the way I want it to get across. So telling stories is the way to do that, which, again, I think this is something we know is fairly straightforward.
Yeah, though the reason why I think is kind of interesting, and we've heard this other places, I don't remember specifically, but the whole idea of the neural coupling, where when someone is telling you a story, that your brains connect and you tend to mirror each other. He gets a little bit more specific, and he talks about how when you're going through the conflict, your brain's producing one chemical, and then when there's a resolution, there's another chemical. I don't know that understanding all that process really changes anything for me, but it was interesting.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, the last practice here is practice 9, evolve yourself. And
the whole book in a nutshell. Yeah,
I'm going to say this is just be willing to change your beliefs. That's pretty much what it says. Let's summarize the whole book up with be willing to change, which is what he's been trying to convince us of this entire time.
There is one thing in this section which I think I've been guilty of overlooking this, is that risks come in all shapes and sizes. He does reiterate that you won't change the world without changing yourself. So that's a place to start, focusing on yourself. He already said that. But he also says that risk is always there whether you realize it or not. So when you think about that, that kind of changes your approach to maybe some life-changing decisions, because you can kind of find yourself in a position where, well, I've got these responsibilities, I'm married, I have kids, whatever, and I've always wanted to go out and do my own thing, but I have this comfortable job and it's providing for us. And so there's more risk in stepping out there and doing my own thing. But that's the natural part of the thought process. And we never counterbalance that by realizing that there is actually risk with just leaving things the way that they are.
Yep.
And in that particular example, I don't think my blanket advice would be like, well, there's risk no matter what you do, so just step out there and see if you can make it happen. But I use that as an example because you and I think, have both been in that position, and probably a lot of the people who are listening to this. And we can apply that a lot of other places, where just because we've done something one way before doesn't automatically mean that that's the safe alternative. There's risk no matter what we do. So number one, we don't really have to be afraid of it. And number two, if we do fail, it's not going to be as catastrophic probably as we make it out to be in our own heads. We tend to be very apprehensive of change and uncertainty. But I think he's trying to encourage us at this point in the book that everything's uncertain. Everything you thought you knew is wrong anyways. So just challenge some things. Maybe you'll get that position that requires a master's without the master's.
All right. Ready for action items? You got more you want to say?
That's it. Let's do it.
All right. I have one action item, which is a little odd in this scenario because this is one of those books where it's like you need to think this way. Like I feel like it's difficult to get a physical action out of this, like a tactical, practical thing to do from a book that's designed to help you think about your beliefs differently. And as I was pondering that, walking the trails at our new property last night, and just kind of wondering my way around this book and the topics around it, it occurred to me, is like, actually the thing I need to do with this particular book is he has this at the beginning, and I'll talk about this here in a second with style and rating, but he has this executive summary up at the very front of this, which I love because it's made it very easy for me to reference different things throughout this book. And I want to take that and print it up on a 8.5 by 11, laminate it, stick it to the wall in front of my computer. And it's primarily because there's a lot of this that's hard to keep in your head. Like, it's hard to keep that in mind. So I just want to have something around that. I'm probably not going to look at it every day. I'm probably not going to, like, after a couple weeks, it'll probably be something I don't reference very often. But having it there to bring it up in mind occasionally, I think would be super helpful. So that's the one thing I want to do with this one.
Cool. I may look into that too. I'm sure there's like a larger poster style version of this.
Oh, sure.
That
I hadn't
look
thought
really
of that,
cool.
yeah.
You know,
that's a good idea too.
I've got two, both from part 1, which is identify my limiting beliefs that I have unwillingly just taken on from other people in my life, and then make a list of my governing beliefs so I can challenge them. It's interesting that you said that, and I agree with you, that there isn't any real direct sort of action items with this, because he tries to give you one every single chapter.
Yeah.
But again, that part didn't really stick with me. So I guess that's getting into style and rating, but.
Okay. All right. Let's step into that then. I suppose I have to go first. So the style on this, I think he nailed it. Like, it's a 2-part book. We didn't even notice. Like, we didn't mention that. It's not a 3-parter. We got an introduction and 2 parts. So there's that. I think he set that up really well. Like, as far as like laying out the principles and then laying out the practices about what to do about it. Like, it's the classic, here is the problem or the inspiration, if you will, and then here's what you do with it. Now, I say that knowing that I just said this isn't a book that has explicit action items with it, even though he has exercises here. But I just didn't take any of those to heart. But in this particular case, like, I think he does do this really well. He does not belabor any topic. It's 144 pages long, lots of diagrams. The first page of each chapter, I notice, has a little bit larger font than the rest of them within the chapter. There's like a summary page that's mostly white, and there's a lot of blank space in this. I'm just saying that. And yet it feels very dense. I feel like we covered a ton. Like, this is a long episode for a short book, if you get what I'm saying. So it's very dense. It's very compact. And as a result, like, I feel like I learned a ton going through this, and it made me wish a lot of people had read this, especially given how hot topic things are today and how firmly people latch on to beliefs that are unfounded in many cases. And that's something that I wish more people were willing to challenge, myself included. Like, I have beliefs that I, just said, foundational things that people don't get. Like, well, maybe I'm the one that's the problem there. So these are things that I think would be extremely helpful. He does have this at the very beginning. There's the outline. Where's it at? I just lost it. But he has a contents and executive summary. We don't normally see this in a book. I can only think of one other book where we've had this, and that was How to Read a Book. But apparently, having gone through How to Read a Book, this used to be the norm, where people would have chapter titles and then an explanation of what was going on in that chapter before you read the book. And people would read the table of contents to decide if they wanted to read the book or not. This is like an homage back to that time, because this is how it's set up. He has the 2 parts. He has like a 1 or 2 sentence explanation of what's going on in each chapter. That's the stuff that I'm wanting to take and put on the card or find a poster of in some form. I really, really like this. I wish more people did this. Not just because it makes it easy to do bookworm, but just because it makes it very easy to reference what's in the book ahead of time. Some people probably read that and shortcut it and don't actually read the whole book, but, at least they got something out of it that way. But I really, really like that. As far as how to rate it, I don't know that I have anything I don't like about it. I mean, it's something that I wish a lot of people would read. I think there's a ton of very valuable information and insight here. Again, I mentioned earlier that I was trying to read this from the lens of, could you read this without having read a bunch of others? I think you totally can. I don't think you have to have some of these background books that we have to get a lot of value out of this. I'm very grateful for having read this one. I am going to put this at a 5.0. I am. Just because I think this is one that I'm going to reference for quite some time. I can already tell that. Just because it's like starting to, like, this conforms with a lot of how I'm starting to like think about things. Maybe that's why I like it, but I do really appreciate his willingness to even challenge himself as he goes through it. So yeah, I'm going to put it at 5. I think it's way up there. I think people should read this. Definitely.
Cool. Well, I agree. This is a great book. It is a very easy read, to be honest. I mean, you could take a lot of time and really think through the concepts that he is telling you. If you digest it as you go, I think maybe it takes you quite a while to get through those 144 pages. But it's a very engaging read, and nothing feels like a mental burden, like you have to just pause and unravel stuff in order to figure it out. I had that sort of thought when I read C.S. Lewis in college. I had a class actually that part of the required reading was The Problem of Pain. And C.S. Lewis was that way, where you could read a single page and then you had to stop for a couple of hours and think about what he just said in that one single page, because there was so much there. So this is like some really heady topics that you could take that approach with, but he doesn't write it in a way where it feels like you have to do that. It's also very visual. And I feel like the visuals that he shares are very, very good. I've got some snapshots of some of the diagrams and things inside of the MindNode file that I took for this one. I would recommend this for just about anybody. I don't think it's quite as good as the Great Mental Models. I still am a little bit confused by these action items at the end of every chapter. I don't think they were necessary. And I feel that every single time I got to one and I had to make the choice, no, I'm not going to do that right now, I felt a little bit guilty, like I wasn't doing what he had asked me to do. And so am I really getting the results from this book that he expects me to get? Maybe I didn't. And I think that's a definite possibility, that like this book just didn't knock my socks off because I didn't follow through and do every little thing that he did or that he recommends that you do. But I also think a lot of the concepts and things that he mentions in here, again, very effective writing style, but having read some other books like The Great Mental Models, I now know there are people who explain them better. The map is not the territory, just as one example. And maybe that's the only example. I don't know. But it's a really good book, and I would definitely recommend people read it. If I could recommend a set of books, I think I probably would. I would include this one and The Great Mental Models. I feel like if you read both of those, you've got a better understanding of some of the things that he's talking about in this one. But I also, having talked through this with you, I do think this stands alone on its own, just maybe doesn't have quite the impact that it had for me. So great book, not quite as good as some of the other ones I would define as in this genre. What is this genre? I don't even know.
I don't know.
It's not like critical thinking. It is sort of like the mental models is the best term that I can think of for this. He gives you some different ways to think about things, but then kind of leaves it up to you in order to apply these in your own life, which I like. That is very much that's my wheelhouse. That's my jam. I love that kind of stuff. So anytime you want to pick a book that fits into that category, I will probably rate it very highly. But I am going to hold it up against The Great Mental Models as the gold standard of the 5.0. So for that reason alone, I think it's 4.5.
Sure.
I don't know if that's fair to the book, but yeah, that's what I'm going to do. It's a great primer for these sorts of things. However, if you want to really dive deep on this sort of stuff, I would recommend that you at least pick up The Great Mental Models Volume 1 also.
Yeah, I tend to call these like mental constructs books, like how do you think type of thing. Anyway, we can put it on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
Next is Willpower Doesn't Work by Benjamin Hardy, because it doesn't.
Okay.
No,
All right.
lots of stuff kind of contributing to this. I came across something that I shared with you about procrastination and ADHD, and I'm like, is this true? And you're like, absolutely. And then we've also read Procrastinate on Purpose. We've read way back in the day, The Willpower Instinct, and kind of a lot of things coming together in my world right now, which are challenging this whole belief of willpower as a way to get things done. And this book, by its title, is attacking that very belief. And I'm curious. I want to see. I want to see what they're going to propose here. It's kind of interesting coming off the heels of this book, because for a long time that was like the bubble of belief, is like, oh, you just got to protect your mental resources, protect your willpower. And so now I'm kind of applying this, right? I'm challenging that and like, well, what's the alternative here?
Fun. I'm looking forward to this one. This will be good. Following that, we're going to go through The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest. 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 I'll have to figure out how to say that. I say that and then I probably won't. Anyway, subtitle on this is Transforming Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery. So if you sabotage yourself so that you fail, that's what we're going to talk about.
All right.
I do this. Do you do this? I do this.
I think everybody does this.
I think we all do. So anyway, if you're a self-sabotager, we're going to talk about it. But that's in 4 weeks, not 2.
All right.
Anyway, there you go. Got any Gap books, Mike?
I do not. How about you?
Not even close. I'm remodeling a house. There's no time. I barely got through this one, and it was short. So here we go.
Right.
Great fun. Huge thank you to those of you who have tuned in today to watch us live. Hi. And who are now listening in your car and such. Thank you for joining us as we go through this. If you haven't already, go to our Bookworm Club, club.bookworm.fm, and go ahead and sign up there. It's $5 a month. You get access to a premium area inside the club there, but you get access to Mike's MindNode files that he puts together for the show. You get to be an awesome person because you help the show stay on, and we just love you. So thank you for those of you who have joined the Bookworm Club membership. And if you haven't, you need to do that. bookworm.fm/membership.
All right. If you are reading along, pick up Willpower Doesn't Work by Benjamin Hardy, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.